So hello everyone, my name is Sonja Stojanović Gajić and I'm going to be your host today. We are going to discuss the impact of war in Ukraine on the think tanks working in its neighborhood. And I have two speakers, one of which has just disappeared from the stage, so we'll wait for another minute or two for Mihai to rejoin us from Chisinau. While you are coming in, I'll kindly ask you to fill in the poll that I have posted. You should be able to see it on the impact of war in Ukraine on your work and the work of your organization. So please fill in the form while we are waiting for the remaining panelists. I can introduce my speakers while you're waiting to see them on stage. So today with us, we are going to have representatives of two organizations, one from Moldova, so one of the smallest European countries, but it accepted the greatest number of refugees per its number. Here is Mihaly in the right moment when I was introducing, from IPRE from Chisinau, a leading pro-EU integration think tank of Moldova, the one address to talk to on security and foreign policy, and a very important actor also on justice and anti-corruption reform in a country. And just to explain how important the network they are, I'm going to give an example from the beginning of this crisis when a friend of mine working for a major international organization providing assistance to refugees asked me for help to get contacts in the countries around Ukraine to do needs analysis on what kind of assistance would be the most helpful for refugees. And the only address I had to call in Moldova was IPRE, and Mihai's colleague, Yulia, who most of you know from OTT community, who has provided contacts both to the Assistant Minister of Interior, so very high-ranking officials, and also other organizations in Moldova. So Mihai, welcome to the stage and to the panel. And in a second, I hope the magic will work also with Elena, who comes from Romania, a bit bigger neighbor, an EU and NATO member, so with more protection than Moldova, representing and leading an organization with probably the most unusual name for think tanks, called Funky Citizens. So here is Elena, and the magic has worked when I mentioned Funky Citizens. As they introduce themselves, they consider themselves Think and Action Tank, so an organization that in many regards does the core think tank work, research and advocacy-based research, but is very dedicated to actively involving citizens, which is not really the first audience of most of think tanks that I know. And just to say how much they involve citizens, I'll say that they were among the initiators of one of the major protests in Romanian history against the legislation that was to decriminalize penalties for officials who did wrong to a certain extent. They are very active in monitoring funds spent by government. So the Funky is there to, I guess, communicate that the think tank work could be also interesting and engaging. But before we start discussing war in Ukraine, maybe just to ask Elena to explain just what type of think tank are you and how do you do work? And then we'll move to what has changed for you since 24th of February this year.
Thank you so much for the kind words, but also for the invitation. We often tell about ourselves that we are professional troublemakers, meaning that we are an organization that is somehow working towards translating what big issues related to, in particular, to good governance can mean for the regular life of the regular citizen. So when we decided on this name, we said that we want something catchy, and we want something that would somehow also raise an eyebrow from time to time, because we started our work when civic tech and social media was just beginning to become an important medium of communication including for the civil society, and including for us. So yes, this is how we became named Funky Citizens. It happened 10 years ago, and when we made it in one of the European Commission reports with this name, we were like, aha! So it works. We can also communicate in a more friendly way when it comes to serious issues like rule of law, anti-corruption, or budgets.
Okay, we will see how the way you approach things has also influenced, so to say, your response to the war in Ukraine. But maybe to go back to Mihai, so the day you woke up after Russian aggression on Ukraine, what was the response of IPRE, and how have you been involved in what's going on in your country in response to war in Ukraine?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Sonja, for inviting me to this discussion. I'm also very happy to be here with you. Of course, it was for us a shock, just like for other countries and other people as well. What we tried to do was to get in touch and strengthen our dialogue with other colleagues from other organizations and try to see how we can help. Of course, as part of our civil society, a bunch of organizations were involved in helping with managing the refugee crisis, with providing social care, providing social protection for the refugees. They actually contacted the public authorities, the local authorities, and tried to see which are the key needs at that very moment. In our case, we tried to help with the on the public information dimension, and try to help with the communication efforts of the government, of the authorities, about what is happening at this very moment, and how and why and in which way we can better disseminate information to the public in order to keep the situation as calm as possible. We developed with our colleagues a campaign called Stop War, which was aimed at, of course, promoting and underlying the idea that the war cannot be admitted, and it should be ended as soon as possible. But at the same time, it was aimed at providing a platform of fair information, correct information, and try to fight against disinformation, which was also a key objective at that point, especially when there was every day a bunch of fake news basically circulating through social media, and the authorities had a big challenge to respond to all of these new issues on the agenda.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mihail. We are going to talk a bit more on how did you get through all this noise, since Moldova is quite polarized society. But if I understood right, your main role was to help government and citizens understand what's going on and not panic in the case of such a crisis. And what was the role for a think tank watching the budgets and judiciary in Romania the day after aggression started, and how did you react?
Well, I must tell you, first of all, that we were actually preparing for a workshop with our colleagues from Transparency International Ukraine on open contracting. It was supposed to happen on the 10th of March. So yeah, immediately after hearing the news, I just dropped an email to them telling that we're there for anything that they would want, and whatever they would need at that point. So I would say that for not only for my organization, but also for others from Romania, this was not necessarily a shock because it happened, because we were somehow expecting it due to the early warnings that we kept on hearing about, but because it was about people that we knew, about our partners, about people that we've planned conferences and research with, and that we were expecting to see in the next couple of weeks, right? So for us, it was mostly about putting ourselves in contact with them, reaching out, and trying to help with whatever was needed, meaning that we needed to actually make that agility that we keep on talking about, or that resilience that we keep on talking about, to work. And for us, it meant that initially we raised, so we basically used our visibility to raise some funds for evacuating refugees that were at the border between Palanca and Ukraine, in the Republic of Moldova, because some of our partners in Moldova reached out to us. So we helped with this, but at the same time, we used our DNA and our regular strengths to do advocacy to the authorities and to the international organizations to set up a corridor for evacuating, so a sustainable corridor for evacuating refugees, and so as not to base this evacuation on just on the efforts of individuals or NGOs or volunteers. We managed to appear on CNN with this effort that we've done, because one of our other partners with whom we were working on budget analysis for the cultural sector dropped the line to Anderson Cooper. He donated for this cause as well, also sent his CNN team to do a video about us. And guess what? Sean Penn's organization, the Core Foundation, Core is a humanitarian organization, saw our initiative on news, and they reached out to us. And now they're working from our office. We established a partnership in which we are basically helping them with delivering humanitarian aid in Ukraine directly, and we are also helping them with identifying the best organizations that they can help with dealing with refugees in Romania.
Mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, from doing nitty-gritty analysis of budgets regarding
hey, don't speak like this about budgets.
No, I know you love budgets, but from very technical work and partnerships both with colleagues in Ukraine but also in other countries, you managed to build on this and get a greater visibility and support. And now you are involved in actually providing humanitarian or managing humanitarian assistance, and if I understood right, vetting the people who could continue this work with support of Sean Penn, a famous actor, and his foundation. Okay,
yeah, so they're the ones putting the most of the resources to work. But I can also tell you that it's about somehow a transfer of trust. Because it was, for us at least, it was about putting to work our network and also being a trusted partner for such an organization to give their money to, and also to trust us that we will identify good partners for them to help forward.
Mm-hmm. And Mihai, what do you think, what kind of partnerships did you use in the work you just described? Like, how did you build the relationship? Is it key, the relationship with the government or some other actors that you have used to address this crisis?
In Moldova, the most representative platform for the civil society organizations is the national platform of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, which is now gathering around 120 CSOs from around the country. And on this platform, we tried to coordinate our efforts with other colleagues. Of course, we got in touch with the authorities we tried to understand which are the key needs at the moment, and we tried also to bridge those needs with the donors that we are communicating with. I told you in the beginning about the civic information campaign that we tried to develop. This idea was further kind of embraced by the government, and they developed a more broader campaign called Moldova for Peace. And basically, we assumed our role as civil society to try to get as much as possible into the media, TV stations, radio stations, media resources, and try to bring our message to the people. Because at that moment, it was very important to communicate and to basically empower the idea that we need to stay strong and we need to inform ourselves only from official sources. We try to bring our analysis and our expertise on different issues in that debate. After a few days and a few weeks, every time when it was needed, we were ready to provide that analysis for either national or international media. Moldova was visited in the last 2 months by probably more media resources than in the last 5 or 7 years. So it was really a very intense job on our side as well. And of course, it was on a voluntary basis because we knew that it's important to do that for the society. It's important to do that for the international community as well. And this work continues at this very moment as well. But now we are focused more on providing policy recommendations for the government on different sectorial issues, on how to deal maybe on already medium and long term with the consequences of the war, with the consequences of the refugee crisis, and try to stabilize the situation internally, because the economic repercussions of the war are putting a lot of pressure on the citizens. And here, of course, you already know about the inflation rate that went very high. Moldova is on the top of the countries in Europe when it comes to the inflation rate. Of course, it also affected the energy. The energy field, the energy policy of the country, and the perspectives in this regard are not very optimistic, and we understand that, and we try to help as much as possible also on the dimension of policy recommendation, policy advice to the government, to the authorities, and also to the international community when this is needed.
And may I just ask you this question about communication? From little that I know about Moldova, I understand that the issue of identity is quite controversial, that there are citizens of Moldova that identify as Moldovans, those that identify as Romanians, those that identify as Moldovans speaking Russian, and that these divisions have been used both by domestic political actors and external actors in the past, and were among the most divisive issues at the elections. And I know that your institute, with other organizations, had a key role in one of the last elections of reframing the priorities in a country from saying that corruption, justice are the issues that hurt equally, no matter how you identify. And I'm wondering, how did you keep the message of unity, or how did you communicate across these divisions at such a sensitive part, at such a sensitive moment for your country? So any tips or advices or anything you would want to share with the group?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is clearly a problem with the interpretation of the information that people get from various resources. And for the ones who inform themselves only from the Russian-speaking media resources, it's quite a challenge to get fair and correct information about what's happening in Ukraine. And of course, the government has to disseminate its information through different channels and to use all the resources that they have to do so. For example, what the government did after the war began was to create a Telegram channel called the First Source, kind of, that would be the translation, in which they posted as soon as possible information about most recent events that were happening, and they were also trying to fight against disinformation through that channel, basically saying that, okay, there was some news about this process or this event, which is not true. And all the public institutions were basically relying on that channel in order to inform the citizens, both in Romanian and Russian, about the fair and correct information on the things that just happened. Now, I'm not sure if there was a strategy focused on ethnic minorities, for example, in comparison, or if there was a different strategy for the ethnic groups than to the ones that are maybe using Romanian language as a first language. I think that the general message was that the government tries to keep the situation as calm as possible through all the instruments that they have. Of course, there was an emphasis on the neutral status of Moldova and the fact that Moldova will not get involved by any means into the war or into the military activities, and we want to stay outside of this of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Now, this message was quite controversial, to be honest, because a part of the society was expecting a more clear response, a more, let's say, bold response from the Moldovan government, and try to be as maybe to try to underline our message that we are going to basically cut any links with Russia, just like, for example, Lithuania did it, or Bulgaria in the last few weeks. But our government, at the same time, had to basically change a bit its approach and try to also deliver a message for those people in Moldova that are either supporters of Russia in terms of geopolitical views, or because of disinformation, are the victims of the propaganda, of the Russian propaganda and disinformation. And even in nowadays conditions, they say that Ukraine is guilty for the war that is happening on the Ukrainian territory. According to the latest polls, around 40% of the Moldovans think that either Ukraine is guilty for what is happening, or both Ukraine and Russia are guilty in the same conditions for the situation that is happening in Ukraine. And that's, of course, very sad. But in the same time, we know that this perception cannot be changed very quickly. You need to invest real efforts into changing this mindset that was built here for 30 years, and of course during the Soviet times. So now the government had to basically accommodate its message to the whole population and try to be as careful as possible with the discourse that they use, in order not to provoke some internal tensions between different ethnic groups or between different regions in Moldova.
Not just internal tensions, but also you have Russian soldiers in part of Moldova since the war in Transnistria. So quite a tense situation. I want to ask both of you, before I ask audience also to join us, because I see there are quite a few people also from a broader neighborhood that is very much affected by the war in Ukraine, as most of the world is. I wanted to ask you what this meant for your core job, especially for your work regarding accountability of governments. As I'm aware, both of your organization have worked on sensitive issues like justice and anti-corruption, transparency of budget, and even fact-checking political statements. Elena, how much demand is there for fact-checking these days in the situation of high emotions that are justifiable in this context? So what did this mean for your organization?
I would say that it was crucial for us to continue to do our job. But what we are doing as an organization, for example, on our program related to accountability in public expenditure, is that we are also always trying to adapt to the public agenda, meaning that we always use the same framework and the same recipe, gathering big data and analyzing and monitoring legislation, trying to respond with good research, translating it to the public, building awareness, reaching out to stakeholders, and so on and so forth. But we are always adapting to the topics that are trending, meaning that during the pandemic, we directed a lot of resources towards monitoring what was happening with public funds allocated for answering to the pandemic, so the healthcare sector. Right now, we are preparing to and actually already started working on monitoring what is happening with the resources allocated for refugees. Because, of course, after the initial shock fades away, we need to remind ourselves the realities of the region. And the realities are shown also in previous research that shows a vulnerability to corruption. The realities are also shown in sometimes the lack of administrative capacity to actually deal with such a big challenge. So from this perspective, I would say that we need to always continue the work that we are doing, but also always ask ourselves, so in this new context, in this new reality, how do I deliver information, analysis, and recommendations that can gather the public support needed to push for changes that have an impact then also on the, let's say, more strategic issues. And I would say that, again, monitoring public spending is quite, let's say, good as a topic because it offers you a lot of flexibility. But I think that it's the same for less sexier topics like anti-corruption and rule of law. Why is that? Because in the context of what is happening right now in Ukraine, we need to remind ourselves that oligarchs, autocracies have actually posed challenges to the democracies in the area, which were not yet very, let's say, mature. So we need to ask ourselves, how do we rebuild, and also answering a bit to the question in the chat, how do we rebuild not only what was bombed and shelled in Ukraine, but how do we make sure that the, let's say, Marshall Plan is actually resumed, or something Marshall Plan alike is resumed in our region, in Central and Eastern Europe, in order to also involve a country like Ukraine? And how do we grow together? And how do we make sure that in this journey we are also we're not only building infrastructure, but also building in institutions? And how do we make sure that we're not giving additional arguments to the narratives that Putin is trying to push on the public agenda of these countries, like, oh, your politicians are corrupt. Yes, they are, but this doesn't mean that we should prefer the Kremlin-based model. What we should do is to make them less corrupt and make sure that democracy is actually fully implemented in our countries. But what I'm trying to say, and my main argument in this is that we should not say that it's not time right now to talk about accountability or about anti-corruption and things like this. It is actually the best time to talk about the big issues, because we have a huge opportunity to have a values-based vision for what is happening, at least in our region, if not with the entire world, because I think I don't want to expand too much on this, but I do believe that what we're witnessing at our borders, it is also let's say relevant for a crisis of democracy that we kept on discussing in the past few years.
Yes, thank you. I've also noticed that a number of donors have shifted focus to the issues of security, to the issues of humanitarian assistance, to geostrategic competition. And somehow, as you said, the anti-corruption component of it, accountability component of it, are put for some later stage, or this is the dilemma that they focus, that not everything can be done at once. And I noticed that, for example, colleagues in Poland and Hungary, also neighbors of Ukraine, have highlighted this, as you said, as possibly the last stage of consolidation of autocratic regimes, because somehow all the issues about judiciary, about rule of law conditionality, stopped being priority. So I think this is a challenge for the whole community that we can discuss, how to keep both issues alive, helping Ukraine and dealing with emergency, and still focusing on accountability of institutions. I saw Enrique had a question in audience. I think we've discussed accountability, but is there anything else that has been missed and that should be addressed? And also maybe Mikhail, because your organization is the #1 address when it comes to EU affairs and Moldova relations. Moldova took a historic decision to apply for membership in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. So what was your role, and how to communicate an EU vision in the context that you described now? So what a think tank like yours does? Are you extended head of government, or you communicate on your own behalf, and what kind of vision do you propose?
Well, first of all, in the aftermath of the accession request sent by Moldova, EU requested us to complete one questionnaire of over 2,100 questions. It was, and this task was done in the last month, from the 11 of April until 12th of May. So in 1 month, the authorities had to deliver on this questionnaire, because at the end of June, the European Council is expected to analyze the EU accession requests of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, and possibly come up with a decision on this request. Now, our role as a think tank, as an organization, was to in this process was to actually be involved in completing the questionnaire and try to help the government to deliver the answers on different sectorial policies. We managed to do that together with other colleagues working in the field of economics, for example, or justice. And the government to some level tried to involve the civil society in this process, although the questionnaire was not published, and the government did not ensure full and open maybe involvement of civil society didn't facilitate basically a public consultation on the questionnaire, if we can call it so, at least through inviting all the CSOs to come up with contributions to fulfilling this questionnaire. So IPRE's role in the last few months was mainly focused on this issue. A second focus that we have right now is to be involved on the advocacy dimension and try to advocate for EU candidate status for Moldova, especially in the context of European Council Summit in June. Now the European Commission is preparing an opinion on whether Moldova meets the Copenhagen criteria for obtaining the EU candidate status, and we try to put some efforts into advocating for this EU candidate status through different instruments. We are preparing actually right now a visit to both Brussels and Berlin and try to speak directly with the actors from the European Commission, Council of EU, German MFA, Bundestag, and we also want to get in touch with the French authorities in this regard, but of course our resources are limited. We know that our colleagues from Ukraine already started to do this because from the initial, basically informal responses that we got to our EU accession request, some countries are still to be convinced about the opportunity to offer EU candidate status for Moldova and probably other two countries like Ukraine or Georgia. And we try to bring into their attention the window of opportunity that they have right now, and we ask them to seize the moment because it's maybe a key political message that the EU needs to send to the people living in Moldova, but also the other two countries at this very complicated moment.
So it seems that two topics are being repeated from the beginning of our conversation, and this is the coordination potential of think tanks, to bring together different people with different expertise, to vet them, to coordinate their inputs, for example, in the question of questionnaire, and then advocacy potential of think tanks to amplify the right message or, if necessary, to put tensions down as two important components. I want to ask if anyone from the audience would have anything to add or want to ask my speakers before we continue. You can request to join at the stage if you're interested. And while the audience is thinking, maybe for Elena and Mihai, what would you recommend as priorities for assistance to your countries in a broader region for a period of the next 2 or 3 years? What could make a difference, both to help Ukraine, but also the region around Ukraine to be stable and prosperous? And especially civil society to go, not to burn out in this first response.
I think that our colleagues from Ukraine gave us a tremendous lesson during these days. Not only the citizens of Ukraine, but also our actual colleagues from the civil society. I remember talking to another colleague from Poland, and he was telling me that Opora, who is an organization that is doing elections monitoring, is now doing monitoring of the war crimes in Russia, made by Russia. I just received at the beginning of last week an email from the colleagues from TI Ukraine saying that we should resume the workshops on open contracting. So they are giving us constant lessons about, actually continuing their work. And I think that this is a priority to help these organizations go on with their regular work, if we want to make sure that whatever assistance is coming to Ukraine is also having a vibrant civil society in general, and think tanks that are able to inform on the medium and long-term interventions that are needed there as well. And the second priority that I keep on thinking about is related to how do we see our common future of the future of civil society involved in a context that is continuously shaken by crisis. How do we adapt as organizations, and how do we build that? I don't want to use resilience, but how do we build that flexibility to make sure that the crisis will not break us, but make us stronger and more relevant?
I think that's related to Enrique's question in a chat on whether you made any changes within the organization regarding management. But before you answer it, I want to welcome Bernard and give him a floor also to ask a question or give a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, panelists, and of course, Sonja, the moderator. I am so pleased to be in this conversation. It's first of all, it's very unfortunate for the incident that is happening in Ukraine. I'm calling in from Uganda, Kampala, and I work for a think tank called Efficacy Methodology, and we have been advancing evidence-based public policy for about 2 or 3 years now. Yeah, I just want to say that it's the war in Ukraine has been has had a very significant impact on Uganda. I just want to share the perspective from Uganda, and of course the regional East African community. Yeah, particularly for Uganda, Uganda imports approximately relies almost all the arms supplies. To about 80% comes from Russia. The wheat imports for Uganda from Russia is about $41 million. In Ukraine, we import about $31 million of wheat. So ideally, we have been gravely affected by the war. And of course, as a think tank, we've been advancing how we've been trying to support Uganda and government, how they're able to respond at a policy level to be able to condense the shock of the war. Interestingly, throughout last year, Uganda, and of course even the neighboring countries of Kenya, for example, and Rwanda, we were in lockdown. Yeah, so we were just emerging out of the lockdown at the end of 2021, before the war began immediately. So ideally, as soon as we are trying to recover from the war, from the effect of COVID-19, the war sets in. Many protagonists argued that the war, of course, it's very distanced from Uganda and all that, but eventually we are feeling the pinch. Currently, inflation rate is quite exorbitantly high at about 5%. It rose by about 3% from January to now. So we have been gravely affected, but as an organization, we have been trying to support government and make necessary policy recommendations that is able to contain the shock, both at a policy but also tactical approaches. Unfortunately, our political environment is so autocratic in nature. Recently, our president made a statement that if you cannot afford bread, if you cannot afford bread, you should look for cassava, which is a locally delicacy. So ideally, government is a little slow, or is not very responsible, taking responsive measures in terms of how to help the citizens help the citizens adapt to the escalating crisis. Yeah. The other thing which, as a think tank, we've also been very critical is how do we advance democratic principles and the values as an organization?
Mm-hmm.
Because as you're aware, our government, for example, Uganda, and most even at East African level, except with the exception of Kenya, we voted in abstinence when it comes to the UN position on Ukraine. So we have actually decided to play more a neutral role, and we have decided to abstain. In other words, we did not take side, which of course ideologically it puts Uganda in a very dire situation, given that Russia is an authoritarian and autocratic regime. Of course, Uganda has been under autocratic regime for quite some time now. But as the population, what ideology are we advancing? Or as an organization, what ideology are we advancing? As an organization, as a think tank, we've been very categorical on this position, and we've made our position known, and we've continued to advise government to take sides, because if we do not take sides, then we are not actually advancing democratic principles to the core. Yeah, so we're actually trying to play as if we are democratic nations or not, so which really does not help the country or the region progress in any way. So I just wanted to make those two observations. But also, as an organization, we've been gravely affected in terms of funding. We are that organizations that were able to generate revenue through our research internally, but also to a larger extent rely on partners and friends who are coming, who are out of the country to support our work. But given the pandemic and the war situation, so the funding has really gone down, which in many ways affected our work and to the extent to which we are able to engage. So I just thought I should join the conversation and share on those two perspectives. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I think this is very important contribution to understand that the impact of this war is reaching the whole world, and it's we should not just take the Eurocentric view. And I think you have clearly explained the real-life consequences for Ugandans and people living in Africa, but also challenges similar to the colleagues in Moldova and Romania on whether you support your government or insist on democracy, or how to mediate between these two contradictions. But maybe just to ask colleagues for the end to answer Enrique's question. I guess at this moment, because of interest and focus on war, there is a lot of support by donors. I know Elena mentioned you also get support from citizens and from celebrities, and anytime you had a relevant action, you got to mobilize different parts of society. But how that impacts your work? Have you decided to employ new people? Has anyone taken new roles within the organization? Or you're still swimming with a curve that is quite fast going and need a time to stop and rethink how to adjust? So I don't know which one of you want to speak about the way you organize work internally, and has anything changed since the crisis and war in Ukraine?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. Well, actually, in terms of workload, I think it changed. I mean, as I told you, we had to invest really efforts into communicating with the citizens, and our number of media appearances got very high. And in the first days, we were basically spending more time in the TV shows and radio emissions rather than actually in our office. And even now we have especially international researchers, journalists coming from coming to Moldova and getting in touch with us to discuss on different sectorial issues. So of course the workload increased on this dimension. In terms of how we structure our work, I think in the beginning, in the first month after the war, some activities were put on hold because of change of priorities for the country, for the government, and so on. After 1 month, 1 month and a half, I think the government and parliament came back to the internal agenda of reforms, and they are now trying to basically focus more on the internal reforms that on which they need to deliver, but in the same time, of course, they try to pay attention to what happens in Ukraine. So basically, I think in the last month we came back to the same regime of work. My colleagues are involved, of course, in different discussions, consultations with some governmental authorities on their in their field of expertise, and they try to help us as much as possible. So yeah, the workload increased, but I wouldn't say that kind of the way we structure our internal functioning of the think tank was impacted greatly by the war.
Thank you. And Elena?
Quickly, because I know we have to wrap up. So we did hire new people, and we now have an entire team that is only dealing with what we're doing with Ukraine. It's not a big team, but there are 3 people. The idea was to also not to have a horrible overload, because people cannot help, getting involved in things because they want to help, but you also need to make sure that you keep things in order. Some things did change, however, also in terms of our approach. I think that we understood even more that advocacy at European and at international level is important, and making sure you have contacts with international organizations, European organizations, and so on and so forth is really, really relevant, especially when we're talking about a crisis, as it was rightfully mentioned, affects the entire world. So not only our region, but the entire globe. So I would say that this is the change that we have operated in terms of the strategic allocation of prioritization of our resources, more advocacy at EU level. That's why I'm currently in Brussels.
Okay. Thank you both. Thanks also to the audience. To sum up, and inspired with one of Enrique's comments, it seems that also think tanks in other parts of the world could benefit from doing a crisis responsiveness exercise, and the part of that exercise should be readiness for domestic communication, for advocacy internationally, for keeping business continuity, doing core work, a lot of efforts in coordination among different actors involved in these levels, and yes, staying sane and getting ready for a long engagement. So thanks everyone, and I ask you to stay and continue this discussion with colleagues from Ukrainian think tanks that are going to join a discussion hosted by a think tank lab from Berlin. So thank you to my speakers, and see you in a few minutes to welcome the colleagues from Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja. Bye-bye.